What's up? Welcome to another episode of Updates with Mr. Warford. This is for my integrated social studies people. Today we're talking about a little bit of constitutional history and some key principles of the document, the Constitution. You need to know for your test. The supreme law of the United States is the U.S. Constitution. So a little bit of history, and this is a little bit of a rerun from 8th grade, a rerun from your Constitution mini poster that you should have completed recently. So the U.S. breaks from Great Britain. They're upset with how they were treated when they were known as the 13 colonies, taxation without representation, all that good stuff. They sign a Declaration of Independence and go to war against Great Britain. They declare themselves a sovereign country, and if you're a sovereign country, you have to have a government. You have to have a set of rules and regulations that citizens live by, so they hastily create this thing called the Articles of Confederation. In short, they are terrible, and they don't really work. There's a lot of problems with it. The federal government doesn't have the power to tax the states, so they don't get money to do things like build roads or help their citizens with different programs within their country. The military is not very strong. There's no court system. Basically, all the states are sovereign nations within themselves. The federal government is supposedly over them, but they don't really have a lot of power. It's really everyone sees themselves as a citizen of their state, not of the U.S. That's a big problem. So the Articles of Confederation are so bad that people start to get upset with how their individual state governments are operating. And you get a thing called Shays' Rebellion. Farmers and Revolutionary War veterans were upset with how they were being taxed by the state of Massachusetts. And they actually had an armed uprising against the government. And it ended up getting squashed pretty quickly, but it was just an illustration of how bad the Articles of Confederation were at keeping the peace within the United States. So you have this thing called the Constitutional Convention. The Constitutional Convention originally was supposed to redraft the Articles of Confederation or fix parts of it to make it better. They ended up wadding it up, throwing it in the trash, and starting over. You get two different sects of people, two different groups of people at the Constitutional Convention, the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. The Federalists believed in a strong central government. They saw that the Articles didn't work. They want a strong central government that can tax the states, that make money, that has a strong military, that can be a presence in the entire world. And people like Alexander Hamilton and James Madison push for that. The Anti-Federalists, on the other hand, are like, hey, we saw what Great Britain did with all that power, and we didn't like it, so we want more localized government. We don't want a new government. We don't want a new constitution. Let's just make the Articles better. So you have this bickering back and forth about what the new government should look like, and they draft two different plans, the Virginia plan and the New Jersey plan. The Virginia plan, they advocated for a bicameral legislature, so that means a two-house lawmaking body, a two-house Congress. And they said that each state's representation, so who works in the government representing the states, should be based on population. So if you're a big state with a lot of people in it, you should have more reps than small states. And some people just called it the big state plan because that's what it was about. New Jersey plan, on the other hand, they said that we should have a Congress or a lawmaking body, but every state should get the same number of representatives. It shouldn't be based on population. This was called the small state plan. So they're bickering back and forth. How can we make this work? Because they're very on opposite ends of the coin. And somebody comes up with the great idea of something called the Great Compromise. Here's what they do. They take elements of both, mix them together. They propose a bicameral legislature. Bicameral means two houses. So we have a Congress with two houses. Now it's known as the Senate and the House of Representatives. One is based on total population of each state, and one is based on just everyone having the same number. So in our government, the U.S. government, the House of Representatives is based on population, and then the Senate is everyone gets two. Every state gets two regardless of population. So it combined these two plans. They end up drafting a constitution. Later the Bill of Rights comes into play, and we're going to talk about that more this year. And they create a new government, the U.S. Constitution. Something to keep in mind here at the bottom. That is, we're talking about all these freedoms that the new Constitution provided people, and how we govern our country with this idea that everyone is free and everyone has rights under the Constitution. Keep in mind that when this document was drafted, slaves only counted as 3/5 of a person to count towards the population, and women couldn't even vote at this time. So while we talk a lot about the freedoms that the Constitution provided and provide today, people had to fight, certain people groups had to fight for hundreds of years longer to get the same rights that the Founding Fathers put in the Constitution. The preamble. Basically, the preamble is this statement about what the purpose of the Constitution is. So you see things like forming a more perfect union, so like fixing what's wrong with the Articles, establishing justice, ensuring domestic tranquility or peace, providing for the common defense, so defending all citizens of the United States, promoting general welfare, things like that. The preamble is just about kind of giving you a snapshot into what the purpose of the document is. We're going to get into key principles of the U.S. Constitution today and tomorrow. We're going to talk about 2 today and 1 tomorrow. Our first key principle is separation of powers. Okay, separation of powers is just authority is divided into 3 branches. And you may have learned this in elementary school, you may have learned it in middle school. There's 3 branches of government: legislative, executive, and judicial. Legislative makes the laws, executive enforces the laws, judicial interprets the laws. Okay? So separation of powers just means exactly that. You're separating the power in our government into 3 different branches. The next key principle is checks and balances. Those 3 branches that we just talked about, they can prevent actions by other branches, and that prevents one from gaining too much power. So you don't want Congress to have all the power. You don't want the president to have all the power. You don't want the court system to have all the power. You want them to be semi-equal, and they can cancel out the powers of each other, and they have certain roles that they play. So here's an example. A president can veto a bill passed by Congress. So that means that Congress can draft a bill, give it to the president, and then he can say, no, we're not going to make that a law. In turn, Congress can then override that with a 2/3 vote in Congress. So you see how they work together to cancel out each other's power and make sure that everybody stays in their lane, so to speak. So if you're confused and you're like, hold up, you're talking about branches, you're talking about powers, talking about how they work together, those 2 terms seem pretty similar. Here's how you want to think of it. Separation of powers is the actual dividing into the branches, dividing the power into 3. Checks and balances is the process that makes them work together. Let me give you an example. So an example would be basketball. Okay, on a basketball team, it's separated into different roles. You got coaches, you got players, and you got managers. Okay, they all have defined things that they do. They've separated the power into 3. Okay, each of them have a defined role. You've separated it into 3. That is the separation of powers at play there. So our 3 branches of government are divided as well. Checks and balances, a great example of that would be how the team, the basketball team, operates together. So each coach, each player, each manager, they have specific jobs that they do. You're never going to see the coach throw the clipboard over his shoulder and spot up for a 3 during the game, right? That's not his role or her role. Each person has a defined role, and they work together to make this team, right? That's checks and balances. Everybody has a role, and they check each other as they go along. So if a player gets out of line, the coach handles it. If a teammate is hurt, the manager may tape up their ankle, whatever it is. Everybody has a defined role, and nobody oversteps their bounds. That's a simple version of checks and balances. So today, you're going to go in and complete a Google form based on this video, and tomorrow we're going to talk about something called federalism.